If I had to sum up the 80s Super Bowl halftime shows in one word, it would be showmanship. If you gave me two words, I'd say huge productions. And if you'd kindly stop restricting the amount of words I can use, I'd just say that it was lots of singing and dancing by huge groups of performers that usually consisted of medleys of well-known songs crammed into a 12 to 13 minute spectacle. Looking at the 80s halftime shows by today's standards, these might seem really lame, but the halftime show wasn't seen as a huge business opportunity yet. In the future, the NFL would commercialize the heck out of halftime, but for now, they were still just trying to find their way. To really appreciate these, try to put yourself in the 80s mindset, and they might just make some sense. Let's jump in and look at the 1980 show first. In 1980, Super Bowl XIV's halftime show brought us a salute to the big band era starring Up With People, accompanied by the Grambling State University Marching Band. For some reason, Grambling State's band appeared in the Super Bowl halftime shows about 100 times over those early years. It's a tradition that unfortunately has died. This was the second appearance of Up With People in a Super Bowl halftime show, and sadly, it would not be the last. If you're not familiar with Up With People, let me just say it was a feel-good act of equal parts dancing, singing, and smiling by hundreds of semi-talented performers. This is the first documented instance of obvious lip-syncing in a Super Bowl, way before Shania Twain's lip-syncing incident. This show also featured a wardrobe malfunction much sooner than Janet Jackson's, which was fortunately caught in the nick of time. Yeah, this is the kind of crap that used to pass for a halftime show at a Super Bowl. Here's audience participation with these cards. This was a constantly recurring theme throughout the 80s. It would be used again and again. Alright, that's enough of the 1980 show. Let's just move on. Can we just... That's enough. Super Bowl XV in 1981 is the only halftime show where I couldn't find any video footage. Regrettably, it appears that this performance has been lost in time. It was a Mardi Gras festival, and all we seem to have are these two photos. Why couldn't we have lost one of the many Up With People shows? Speaking of Up With People, let's look at 1982's Super Bowl XVI show.
May even be more exciting than the game we've just seen in the first half. Let's go down now.
Spoiler alert, it wasn't. This was a show called A Salute to the 1960s starring none other than Up With People. They danced and sang a medley of 1960 songs in the silliest way possible. They managed to make the 60s more boring than they actually were with their upbeat take on the hits. The Beatles tribute toward the end was the high point if there was such a thing, but not because of Up With People, because of the Beatles. I mean, how do you watch this and think it's anything but laughable? Quick, let's move on to 1983. Welcome to 1983, where Super Bowl XVII gave us what amounted to the worst Super Bowl halftime show ever. Kaleidos Superscope boasted a 105,000 person cast because they claimed the audience participation as part of the show. There was disco music. There were lots of silly formations on the field, and there were several seconds of this person's rear end in the booth. Several seconds. I mean, it took them a painfully long time to realize that they were on that camera, and even longer to switch cameras once they made the realization.
Ladies and gentlemen,
This is just hard to watch.
live from Pasadena, California.
Instructions to the crowd displayed on the big screen so fans would know which cards to hold up and when. Cheesy circus-style music just kept playing with random kaleidoscope shots on screen, while the performers on the field spun some not-so-impressive streamers. There was no singing, there was no dancing, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say it didn't work. I don't know if it looked cool in the stadium, but in the broadcast, it was really lackluster, and that's being kind. The grand finale was anything but grand. They seriously abused that term grand finale here. Somebody thought this was going to be really cool, and it just wasn't. At the end, there was a balloon release, which would happen over and over in halftime shows throughout that era. In 1984, we were treated to Disney's sparkling Salute to the Silver Screen, starring 2 university marching bands and 2,100 performers, and it starts right off with a balloon release, and that wouldn't be the last one in this show. Here is a really boring guy singing with some dancers. Something about this guy just makes me want to yawn. Goofy's there, and at least he's not trying to sing, because that would be really dumb. And I spoke too soon. He's singing, and it really, really sounds awful. This watches like an overblown commercial for Disney World, which it is. It's not doing that much to attract me to go there, though. Okay, in this part, I'm pretty sure the producers messed up. Hey, we asked for Chip and Dale, not Chippendale dancers. I guess the masses must have really loved the Disney theme because it came back again and again in the 80s. Let's go to 1985 for a show called World of Children's Dreams by Air Force Tops in Blue. While this was an incredibly cheesy show, in a way, I love that it reminds me of a simpler and, dare I say, more wholesome time. But I gotta say, if I was in the crowd, I might have been lulled to sleep by this show. If I was watching this on TV, it would have been a really good time to wander away from the TV and get some snacks. Of course, you had to have the balloon release. And I will say, this show got better as it went, even though it was a snoozer overall. The highlight was definitely this jetpack guy. This is actually pretty incredible, and I would have been amazed to see this part as a kid. And it wasn't the first time a jetpack appeared in the Super Bowl halftime. 2 jetpack pilots actually flew around the first Super Bowl halftime in 1967. Well done, sir. We got another balloon release. A 3rd balloon release. A 4th balloon release. Wow, 5 balloon releases. They're really going for it. Oh, and there's a 6th balloon. Okay, we get it, guys. You really love killing dolphins. Overall, this was a typical halftime show for the era that didn't break any new ground or solidify itself as an ultra-memorable performance. I think my favorite part, though, was here at the end, because on the TV broadcast, some technical director's microphone was patched in on accident.
I think that they will, yes. I don't think there's a bridge in between, but, I mean, frankly, they're not communicating with me, so we'll have to play that by ear, Tom, but I think...
In 1986, we celebrated the 20th Super Bowl with the ill-advised return of Up With People. This show was a tribute to Martin Luther King Jr. called Beat of the Future, and happily this would be Up With People's last ever appearance. They had a good run, appearing 5 times total, thrice in the 80s. This show, though, this is 80s to a T. If you were going to describe the 80s in one performance, this was it. If you want to understand the 80s, go watch this full performance. And I know it might be painful to get through the whole thing, but you'll get a thick, steaming slice of 80s like you'll see nowhere else. Some of my favorite 80s songs here. You got Power of Love. You got Footloose. And you got whatever this song is. They're going to top it with even more 80s goodness. There was this healthy dose of world peace messaging, which was a really popular theme in this era. Okay, as much as I hate to say it, let's move on. 1987's show was entitled The World of Make-Believe, yet there was no sign of Mr. Rogers anywhere. That's quite an oversight. It was the salute to 100 years of Hollywood, and it started with a balloon release, of course. I really appreciated this Mickey Rooney cameo for some reason. It's just funny. The low point had to be Goofy singing about the Super Bowl.
It's even better when a Sunday football game.
Goofy and Chip and Dale, they were really out of place and it seemed really dumb. The whole thing was out of place and out of line. Really, by this time, they were way overdue for a new template for halftime shows, but it would still be a few years before they would figure that out. For the second year in a row, there was a Footloose performance, which just shows how popular that song was. At the end, the audience held up cards to spell out the word Hollywood, sort of. The score graphic got in the way, and then they took it down really quick. And then, of course, there would be another balloon release. 1988's performance, entitled Something Grand, did something kind of cool. They set up 88 grand pianos in the shape of 2 big grand pianos, which was a really neat idea. I got to admit, this was a pretty impressive performance, and I hate moving pianos, and they quickly moved 88 of them for this. I got to say, well done, boys. 3 area university marching bands combined to form a super swing band and play with the pianos. It was a pretty awesome effect. And call me old-fashioned, but there's just something nice about the Radio City Rockettes dancing around. But okay, we can move on from the Rockettes now. Or let's revisit the Rockettes performance just a little bit longer. There we go. Things were going along pretty good, but they really hit a crescendo when all of a sudden Chubby Checker appeared and performed the twist with a bunch of jazzercise dancers. Now this is what I call a party. Okay, buckle up for the last show of the 1980s. Everything started changing in 1989, Super Bowl XXIII. This was the first halftime show with a sponsor, Diet Coke, which sounds weird because in the recent era they've all been sponsored by Pepsi. But at any rate, Bob Costas was forced to introduce the halftime show, and he clearly wasn't happy about it. He laid the sarcasm on thick, and you know behind the scenes they had to really twist his arm to get him to go along with it. But in spite of Costas' misgivings, the halftime show was a huge deal at the time. This show broke new ground. It was the first live TV broadcast in 3D, and at that time, everyone, me included, was trying to get their hands on 3D glasses in advance so we could experience the new technology. The show was called Bebop Bamboozled. It had a 50s theme, which would be kind of like if we did a 90s theme today. It featured an Elvis impersonator slash dancer slash magician named Elvis Presto. It had a ton of 50s era show tunes and musicals lip-synced by a dancing Elvis Presto, accompanied by hundreds of background dancers. It had costume changes, special effects, fireworks, and a bunch of really lame magic tricks. An audience participation magic trick was attempted, not with the audience holding up colored cards as they'd done so many times before, but with Elvis Presto magically picking the card the audience was thinking about, or something. It really didn't make a lot of sense in the broadcast, and the premise was really lame. Maybe the people in the stadium got it. I don't know.
Now hold up your cushion, surprise, surprise, right before your very eyes.
Although Elvis Presto was the star, only one of the many songs performed was an Elvis song, Hunk of Burnin' Love. Later on, as part of another failed trick, an Elvis Presto copy rode around on a motorcycle, and I think we were supposed to think that he teleported to the motorcycle and back, even though the copy on the motorcycle looked nothing like the real Elvis Presto. If you were around for Super Bowl XXIII, you remember this halftime show. It was the most memorable halftime show of the 80s by any measure. And understandably, when people watch it today, They shred it to bits because it looks so stupid by today's standards, but by the standards of the day, it was incredible. Everybody was talking about it. It was an overwhelming marketing success. The 3D aspect was a huge hit even though it didn't really catch on. And no one seemed to think that Elvis Presto and his ho-hum magic tricks was really cringe-inducing until many years later. As you take in the halftime shows of today, tell me they're better than this. Go ahead. I bet you can't tell me with a straight face. There's really no comparison to the majesty of the 80s shows to the stuff that gets churned out today. All right, it's time to sound off in the comments. According to you, what were the best and worst moments of the Super Bowl halftime shows of the 1980s? Do tell. I can't wait to see what you think.